Okay, so my topic is the horror hope is excessive coping bad for self-change, ToneAn. Decades of medical research all points to the idea that the human anatomy has the ability to heal over time from an injury or an occurrence. This in turn allows us to formulate the idealized version to bounce back from a change. As Nicholson, a MD, states, cells in our bodies have the outstanding ability, the outstanding programming as they can repair and reconstitute tissues and organ function even after an insult. So then the question is raised if all humans are able to be resilient. Like humans, animals and plants share similar adaptive coping mechanisms. An example of this is the English pepper moth, which explores the darkened color due to the response of coal pollution. However, humans who experience physical change often undergo mental change with this. Unlike animals, most humans are unable to mentally cope from their physical change. Although a person can physically cope, this may not be the same for their mentality. As the French philosopher René says, the mind and the body is different. Their separation brings to question their different abilities for resilience. As he states, the natures of mind and bodies are completely different from one another, and that each could exist by themselves. Mentally, unlike the body's ability for regenerating cells, the mind is increasingly difficult to bounce back from. Humans, on the other hand, are always expected to be resilient and cope and adapt. In society, the ability to always return to a previous state of mind is idealized. This leads to an unrealistic push for resilience and coping. Media, one of the sources which replicates life, also replicates the damage caused by the intention of resilience. In the 2010 film Shutter Island, it illustrates the film's driven delusion developed by one of the main characters to return to a previous state of mind from before his wife's death. His efforts to bounce back, as was said, only furthered his mental disparities and his mental psychosis. But who does this really affect, really? The 57.8 million American adults who suffer from a mental illness. With the push to be ideal to be more resilient, coping by delusion is more prevalent than ever and is exemplified by false hope. We can see this in the false hope syndrome, which exemplifies high expectations and unhealthy coping. Self-help books are one of the most exploiting sources of media that takes advantage of mentally ill people by creating unrealistic goals and achievements to return to a past state of mind which they know can't be true. Most of which are not regulated by the government to actually provide help for these people. To aid with these false hope promoted with unattainable goals, we first have to recognize this problem. These means for excessive coping, just for resilience, is a temporary aid to a long problem. It takes a lot longer for a person to mentally adapt to, and too much coping is never beneficial for self-improvement. The phrase, "you can handle this," is expressed one too many times as society puts too much expectations on the ability to cope and adapt. And we need to change this by accepting our inability to change who we are and return to who we once were. We do, however, need to change these self-help books who does more harm than good by promoting these unrealistic expectations. This change in regulating self-help books does have its limitations, as these books filled with false hope can provide a sense of relief for these people, even if it's just false hope. Although it's unrealistic at times, it is still a goal for people to go for, and even though it's less likely to pass because So even if we regulate these self-help books, the previous self-help books still stands as it's hard to change all these books at once just for this goal. And to regulate all these self-help books just for promoting false hope is unrealistic to happen. On the other hand, regulating self-help books can raise awareness to the harm in resilience and excessive coping. These steps acknowledge that not everyone has the ability to cope, as once was said, with the physical ability to cope and return to who they once were. And of course, there are some economical factors of this, since a change in self-help books can allow for less money to be made, since most of the people who are buying these self-help books are buying it for the ability for false hope. And induced trauma isn't good or bad, but a person's reaction to these traumas is what makes it detrimental. Hence, the first step in self-improvement is the ability to accept these events in the present and not dwell too much on the past, which is what these self-help books benefit off of, which is why we need to stop these.
All right, just give me one moment. All right, so I have two questions for you. What information did you need before you began your research, and how did that information shape your research?
Okay, so first I wanted to establish the physical effects of resilience. Like, I looked at medical forms and all that because I wanted to compare the physical prospects of our cells regenerating and going back to the previous state, and I wanted to compare that to our mental ability. And I found out they were different because even though people have the ability to cope physically, mentally it's not the same.
Okay. And then lastly, how does your conclusion respond to any of the other research or sources you examined?
Can you repeat that?
Sure. How does your conclusion respond to any of the other research or sources you examined?
Okay, so my conclusion was that resilience as a whole isn't good because the excessive coping obviously isn't beneficial because it creates an unrealistic expectations. And I compare this with the false hope syndrome, which is another claim made by another person. And I basically included that in my final conclusion to exemplify my claim that resilience is not good.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Are you